This time, we would like to talk about how to manipulate our mind and body, including the subconscious, to maximize their potential. At the exact time I'm recording this, we are witnessing Shohei Ohtani in Major League Baseball achieving an unprecedented record. Mentally and physically, he has achieved a great record that no other challengers in the long history of Major League Baseball have been able to accomplish. The result, many people may have felt that we can bring out our inherent abilities, both mental and physical, and all possibilities once again, and live the life we desire more with the belief that it should be possible. His performance, I feel as though it might be a form of self-projection, thinking that if I try, I might achieve more too. He is one of the few great players with such magnificent records. It was an extraordinary moment that inspires us to take on new challenges. In that sense, I believe it was a very precious moment. Our abilities and mindset that we possess actually dormant, not because they lack power, but because we can't grasp how to use them effectively. In reality, there is a more effective way to use it, a way to better achieve our goals and objectives. But due to not knowing this, we often fail to execute them well. This is about the cognitive limitation that what we perceive in this world is not the world as it is, but rather we only interpret it in the way we want to perceive it. The information in this world and the input from our sensory organs are vast, and processing them in real time requires a lot of energy. Therefore, if we tried to process all of it, our brains wouldn't be able to keep up. So we discard unnecessary information and extract and process only what we think is necessary. However, the brain has a mechanism that creates an illusion, making us unaware that we are doing such processing. Our eyes have cells that perceive and determine colors, and these cells are only found in the center of our eyes. There are actually no color sensing cells in that area. Despite this, we don't feel only the middle has color and the surroundings look black and white. This means that in reality, only the center can see colors, but the brain independently colors the peripheral areas. We don't even notice that our surroundings are in black and white. You can see from this, our bodies and brains do not show us the world as it truly is, but rather show us a simulation of the world that is very close to reality. This means that depending on whether we understand that premise, the way we use our bodies and minds will change. It's important to understand how we perceive the world and how we can change it, as well as to know the mechanisms of controlling and moving our bodies as we wish. Many neuroscientists and researchers who have studied this can explain the mechanism, and there's a lot of information on it. But understanding the mechanism and being able to actually manipulate it are different things. In baseball, for instance, many people can explain the mechanics of how a player like Ohtani uses his body. But in reality, how many people can actually perform like him? The truth is, there aren't any. The reason is that even if you understand the mechanism of how to use your body like his, there is no one who knows how to reproduce it as a sensation. This also applies to bodily sensations. But the difference with many neuroscientists, meditation practitioners, and those practicing mindfulness is here. Practitioners capture what needs to be done as a sense in practice and then put it into action, using it concretely to change the world. Neuroscientists are interested in and become knowledgeable about mechanisms and systems. But even if they understand how the brain works, it doesn't mean they can use that knowledge to change their own mind or mental state. Ironically, many neuroscientists and psychologists actually suffer from mental disorders. It seems like we understand our own brains and psychology, but in reality, we can't fully master them. This means that while a car mechanic is skilled at understanding and repairing car mechanisms, an F1 driver is much better at actually driving. When it comes to actually driving a car, a driver who understands how to react and handle the car, even if they don't fully understand the mechanics, is more skilled than a mechanic who knows the mechanics. In that sense, just because we understand the mechanism doesn't mean we can execute it that way. The flip side is that if you can actually execute it and your senses can perceive it well, then that might actually be more important. However, in reality, we have a sense and it was going well. For example, in the case of a car, when a car breaks down or starts having trouble, The mechanism of why this trouble occurred is so when it stops working well, we can't get back to the original state. Ideally, understanding the mechanism and being able to practice it many times, having a sense of that practice, having both of these is what allows for consistently stable performance. If you have been relying on intuition and practicing accordingly and it starts to not work out well, knowing the mechanism of why it didn't work out well will give you the idea and perspective on how to handle it next time based on that mechanism. If you can try various senses and gain a new sense that suits the new situation, you can practice from there again. Therefore, like Shohei Ohtani, by knowing both your ideal batting form and how to practice it, when your batting form breaks down or you stop getting results, you can review the mechanisms to understand what the problem is and adjust your instincts to get back on track. So if you want to achieve high performance, just knowing the mechanisms isn't enough, and doing it based on feeling alone isn't good either. It's desirable to have both. Even among them, the more important one is the sense. Practicing based on intuition is important. So, regarding the understanding of the mechanism itself, I think many people are discussing similar topics in various ways, whether it's on YouTube, podcasts, or books. What matters is that you all practice and gain a sense of it. Today, I would like to explain how to gain a sense of bodily awareness and provide some hints and ways to imagine this concept. It also uses expressions from a spiritual perspective. The reason is that to truly understand our senses, it's easier to use spiritual elements as metaphors when describing those sensations. For the image, it might sound a bit like an occult or spiritual expression, but I'll intentionally use it this time. My talk this time will be an explanation of the mechanisms based on a scientific perspective and how to incorporate that as a sense of trust through a spiritual perspective. These things will come and go. So throughout the whole, if someone starts listening from the middle where spiritual expressions are used, they might mistakenly think that Ogaki has veered into the spiritual side. Therefore, in that sense, I want to convey this caution as a preliminary note when talking about this in the first half. Let's start with the brain. This is a brief explanation, and as I mentioned in my previous episodes about how the brain works, I also talked about the mechanism of the eye, like how we can only see color in the center. I'd like to explain using some metaphorical expressions on how we perceive the world. First of all, we do not perceive this world as it truly is. This applies to seeing the texture you feel, and also feelings like pain, sadness, suffering, and joy. These are not actually present in the world, but our bodies have evolved to perceive them this way, and the brain processes what we perceive in this manner. Ultimately, it's the brain that's recreating these experiences. So instead of living in this world, we are living inside the brain, which is inside our skull. This means is that we are like an audience in a movie theater that we can never leave, sitting in front of the movie screen, just watching the movie. We cannot leave this movie theater, and we cannot remove our brain from this skull. Therefore, we cannot see the world directly. We only see the images projected on the screen and the results of the processed sensations that come from there. So what is projected on this screen is not the world, but rather there must be a projector somewhere projecting onto this screen. First, imagine we are like an audience sitting in front of a movie screen. When we look at this world, the audience sitting there is you, but the image on that screen is being made somewhere and projected, right? The image being projected on the screen of that movie is actually coming from a projector behind you. That projector is the real thing, and that projector, it's also you. This is one key point of thinking, and what this projector is actually your subconscious mind. And realizing this mechanism, that is metacognition. We automatically process many things with our subconscious, and while we may feel that we can separate our subconscious from the conscious awareness of it, in reality, they are not separated. Everything is actually intertwined. It is not very appropriate to distinguish the cognitive functions of our brain with expressions like subconscious or conscious awareness. It's easy to understand. So many people explain it that way, and there was a time when it was really thought to be true. Therefore, as a remnant, the subconscious, which is the area we cannot be aware of, and the conscious, which is the area we can be aware of, are sometimes explained in this way, but it is not correct. Prioritizing simplicity, I think it's common to say it that way. And if it actually helps understanding and practice, then I think it's perfectly fine to use such expressions if they are effective. time, instead of dividing it like subconscious and conscious, imagine a screen with an audience sitting in front of it watching, and then a projector behind them. The important thing is this projector. This is the main unit that projects the images onto the screen. It's actually creating the story in real time and projecting it there. Recently, for example, generative AI has reached an age where it can continuously create stories and make videos in real time. So the image is something like that. Connected to the projector, there's a director, production staff, and screenwriter creating the script in real time. Even with the screenplays we create in real time, most of those scripts, content, and images are reused materials that we have used in the past. Therefore, almost everything that is going to be projected from the projector is actually already available as stock. Therefore, it can only be reused and used simply as a reproduction. So in fact, almost no new stories or new images actually appear. When you are a child and don't know the world at all, everything you see is new and keeps getting projected one after another. However, now that I'm over 40, as you reach a certain age, it's not like that. And you end up reusing most of it. The way is more energy saving, isn't it? It's more efficient to rebroadcast stored stock from the past than to create a new story. So that's how most of them will be. That's one of the reasons why we can't try new things, or it's a factor that hinders us from learning new things. The first step is to notice this mechanism. It's not just about understanding it as a theory, but truly feeling that it is indeed like that. The scenery, landscape, and bodily sensations in front of you right now are merely being reproduced on a screen. Can you imagine yourself as an audience member who's under the illusion that these are real? You're just watching a movie, that's all. So when the main character in the movie experiences pain or sadness, it's not you who is experiencing it. It's just the way the story in the movie is. However, you might feel the emotional or physical pain yourself. That's how close you are to the screen. If you want a more concrete image, it's not a movie theater, but something like VR goggles or AR glasses. Imagine wearing these goggles with images projected inside them, and you watch through them, so you, as the audience, feel very close to the screen. The image on the screen in front of you seems to be distant from you as an audience. Through listening to my talk, can you now imagine that there might actually be a distance there? You realize that these are the audience watching the screen, and you can actually imagine it. It is only then that you become aware of this state. Next, the image projected on the screen is being projected from behind you all. So where is it being projected from? The projector is actually inside our skulls, in our brains. So it must be somewhere in the brain, right? The projector should come out of our bodies because it needs to be behind the audience. So imagine this. Picture a projector even further back than the back of your head. Because, of course, the relationship between you as the audience and the projector needs to be such that the projector is behind you. The actual image is that this projector should come out of our bodies, behind your body. For the specific location that is good, it is slightly above the space between the right and left shoulder blades when you straighten your back. If you draw a line, it's the spine between the shoulder blades. This area is actually the optimal place to imagine a projector. Projector is usually attached to the back of this body on the spine, but try to move it away from your body by straightening your back and tucking in your chin. At this point, when considering what kind of image is good, some people use various images as metaphors, but one expression that fits well is a braid. This is a metaphor used by the Russian writer Vadim Zeland, where a braid hangs from the back of the head with a projector at the end of the braid. My current back of the head to the shoulder blades is usually drooping and sticking to the spine. But if you want to pull it away, you puff out your chest and draw your chin slightly, right? The projector will then move slightly away from your back. It will project towards the screen from that projector. The screen is located around the forehead here. So imagine a projection from the shoulder blades on the back onto this forehead. Perception of this bodily sensation changes. Until now, you have probably lived with the perception that yourself is inside the boundary of your skin and the outside of your skin is the external world. It's not like that. The concept of self actually extends beyond the skin. In particular, in this example, there is a projector that is even further behind than the back. There is something projecting our world from behind. To be mindful, it's important to visualize that projector. You're outside your body. There is something that shows you this world outside yourself. Imagining the end of a braid can sometimes make it easier to visualize. There might be people who find it more fitting to express this as having a guardian deity, a guardian spirit, or a guardian angel watching over their back and protecting them. Either way, project from a little behind the spine in the middle of the shoulder blades, since it usually hangs down like a braid and sticks to the back, straight in your back. Puff your chest and tug your chin in slightly to pull it away from your back. At that moment, it feels like this braid suddenly detached from your back. When you come to that, it's like a projector ahead. So try to imagine that you are projecting the world onto a screen from there. You can picture this. You finally realize your current state here. This is the first step to becoming mindful. Mindfulness means living in the present moment, paying attention to all the bodily sensations and everything you are experiencing right now. Therefore, instead of focusing on things you cannot control, like future events that haven't happened yet, or things that happened in the past, let's be aware of the current state at this very moment. This realization is, after all, about how we perceive the world, and we need to be aware of it, whether or not we can properly recreate the sensation that the world we are seeing now, the scenery we see, and this feeling are nothing more than projections. This is what truly being mindful means. That is how metacognition finally comes into play. Objectively viewing oneself, including oneself in the observation. This metacognition is actually a significant characteristic of humans and something that other animals cannot do. How to train metacognition and how to maintain a state where metacognition is activated is actually crucial for maximizing the performance of our mind and body operations. It's the same with mental training and regular sports training. But you can't make the right judgment unless you can objectively view things like your form when you're swinging or the situation in a match, including yourself. When objectively examining a situation, the perspective used for this objective view must be detached from one's own physical body, as it includes oneself as well. It needs to be external, doesn't it? Metacognition involves imagining such things. So it's ideal if we can conceptualize the current idea of a projector being external to our body, preferably behind us. The reason is because our eyes are positioned to look forward. The world we see is always viewed from the front, right? This means that the world we see in front of us must be somehow projected. So it's effective to imagine a projector behind me. If you imagine there is a projector behind you, it's not just the world in front of you that exists, but you can also imagine there is a world behind you as well. The idea that the projector is on your back allows you to pay attention to the sense of the state of the world behind you. We become more sensitive to stimuli entering our bodies. And when those stimuli do enter, we don't have to trust them all. And most of them are stimuli created by projectors. So we can doubt those stimuli too. You don't have to be swept away by that stimulus. This means that when emotions arise or you experience certain feelings, you don't necessarily have to accept them as truth and be carried away by them. Instead, be aware that even these feelings are projections created by your mind. If you can maintain this awareness, you can observe these emotions and decide from a meta perspective how to react. This state is what we call being mindful. The important part is not just being mindful during meditation, but being able to activate this meta awareness outside of meditation in everyday life. Living each day with this meta awareness is crucial. Meta awareness should not be limited to moments of meditation. Rather than meditation, it's better to bring a truly mindful state or meta awareness into activities like work or sports when you're doing some task or activity. This time, I won't talk about how to meditate, but when you're actively trying to do something in your daily activities, try to maintain a state of metacognition. Stay mindful and think about controlling this bodily sensation. The story we are creating is ultimately chosen to be easily understood by us. In reality, this is not something projected onto a screen, but real information from this world that's perceived with our own eyes, including what's not projected. In fact, in this real world, there is originally no such thing as a story. There is no story, just reality flowing smoothly as various things move. However, we create stories because we want to somehow understand them and interpret them as something meaningful that makes our lives easier. As for where the story is created, it's this projector that creates it. However, it doesn't create an infinite number of story variations or patterns, but only those that the audience can understand and recognize as a story. The audience is essentially yourself. The story is created in a way that only things you understand can be included. Therefore, the world you see is always filled with similar stories. This phenomenon, where people's perspectives differ, ultimately depends on the individual, because the familiar story is different for each person. When observing a phenomenon, some people interpret it as a pessimistic and sad scene, while others find it profound and interesting. This depends on the story that is projected onto the screen in front of them. Even when looking at the same light, the same scenery, or having the same sensations, the interpretation can differ. It means that what is projected changes depending on how you, the audience, want to see the story, or what kind of story you can interpret and understand. Unfortunately, as an audience member sitting in front of the screen, you cannot directly change the story. As the audience, you cannot directly influence the story that is being projected in front of you. You can only watch what is playing. However, if you want to see a different story or change the story, what should you do? Instead of doing something as the audience, you need to interact with the projector. The projector creates and projects a story based on the information received through this eye and the input senses. But when it comes to creating the story from the obtained information, there's actually room for our intervention. While this projector is trying to create and project a story, there is still our freedom of choice in deciding what information to discard and what information to pick up when changing the story, and what information to use to create it. However, once it has been projected, we are the audience. And as the audience, there is nothing more we can do. We are forced to watch the movie, and we cannot leave our seats or shut our eyes to cut off the images flowing from the screen. So we need to change the projector when a story is being created with the projector. Be mindful and be aware of the projector's existence. By imagining things outside of yourself, you'll start to see things differently, including things you thought were important but weren't visible before. There are times when things we didn't think were important start to seem significant, or conversely, things we've overlooked begin to seem valuable. As a result, the story projected on the screen starts to change little by little. Interpretations that didn't occur before may arise, and new stories may develop, causing the projected narrative to gradually transform. The projector will start reacting to picking up information that hasn't been picked up before, or changing things that should have been discarded to things that shouldn't be discarded. So metacognition will change how we behave in it. When our actions change, the information we receive naturally changes as well. And when our actions change, it means our influence on the world changes too. As a result, the world will respond to us in a different way. This will lead to a new story in our lives, a story different from what we've experienced before. Being mindful is an interesting way to enrich and enjoy our lives. It is also a unique human concept of metacognition, which other animals do not possess. So how can we fully utilize this? How can we train our metacognition regularly? The more you train metacognition, the easier it becomes to practice it. However, there are limits, and you need to be careful if your brain is extremely tired or depleted of energy. Metacognition requires a lot of energy, so it can be quite exhausting. But as you keep doing it, you gradually become able to do it. Just like strength training, the more you train, the stronger you become. This way, you can maintain a state of metacognition and reproduce it at any time. So it's good to practice this in your daily life, as if it's a training session. This time, I talked about tips on body awareness that can serve as hints for what kind of image we should have during activities other than meditation, and what mental and physical state is most effective for perceiving the world. In conclusion, the world we see is something projected onto the screen around our foreheads. And what I think is me is actually the audience sitting in front of that screen. The first step is to realize whether you can notice that you are your own audience. This screen is projected by a source, which is a projector. In more advanced terms, it's a controller. Since what is projected on this screen is not just an image, but also sensations, pain, sadness, and so on. We manage, control, and adjust the various things being projected. Therefore, the The term controller is a more appropriate expression. With this controller, we can objectively view ourselves and by acting on it, move more effectively in the world and gain a more beneficial way of living and feeling. First, activate the controller and acknowledge its existence. Notice the controller's presence and consider how to interact with it. This perspective on the world and our actions can enhance our metacognition. This is one key to strengthening our metacognitive abilities. The self that objectively views oneself includes oneself in perceiving this world. To objectively view oneself, it's like flipping the perspective to have yourself outside of your body. The most effective place, I think, is between the shoulder blades, just about where a braid would fall on your back and attach itself there. Try puffing out your chest a little and arching your back slightly. In that position, if you tuck your chin in firmly, the tip of your braid will lift slightly, won't it? Look at the world in that state. And when you view it as if the world is projected from that place, the way the scenery entering through these eyes appears changes slightly. When you're focused on a task in front of you, it can be difficult, but I think if you try it when you can, like when you're on a walk or looking at scenery from the train, you'll notice a different way of seeing and feeling the world compared to before. A change in perception means that behavior will change. When behavior changes, the inputs from the world also change. If you start taking walks to places you didn't go before, the scenery changes, and you might notice new things because of that scenery. This can lead to different behaviors. The various things changing in a chain reaction. You can newly realize things you want to achieve or obtain in your life. So by doing this mindful activity we are doing now, it's not automatically, or in other words, a way for our dreams or goals to come true. Instead, it's about truly obtaining a new perspective on what we think is good, what we like, or what this world is like and how we are behaving within it. Ultimately, you're just an audience member being made to watch that movie. So if something is influenced, it's only the controller who decides how to project this world. It's not that if you strongly wish for something or desperately try to do something, things will go your way. Ultimately, in this world, it's good to realize that the only things that can be influenced are those that the controller can manage. However, even if it's just that, it can certainly change interpretations or perspectives. So being able to adjust is about consciously deciding what information from the world is important or not, instead of automatically discarding or picking up information. By being able to do this, the image projected on your forehead will be different from before. We only have the freedom to choose what to project onto this world. However, even if that is the case, if you can notice it and make the best possible choice, the story and what is projected will change significantly. As a result, the behavior influenced by it will change. This is not something to be underestimated. Even if we have little freedom to make changes, by consciously and selectively making those changes, significant changes can occur over time. Therefore, rather than being disappointed by believing in overly optimistic notions like the law of attraction, where you just wish and things happen, or the idealism that the world changes exactly by the amount of effort you put in, it is much more realistic. There is little we can change. However, if we go about it selectively and effectively, even that little can make a significant difference. Even if we only have a small amount of freedom, it's not that we have none at all. Just by accumulating those small choices over the long term, it can lead to very significant changes. With that understanding, if you consciously make your best effort, try to realistically grasp and act on those small choices. If you haven't read my book, please buy it on Amazon and give it a read. Besides this, I've also written several other books, so if you like, I hope you will read them. I also have a few that I am still writing, so I hope you will buy and read them when they come out.